out of a matter of convenience. They both see how maybe they can get what they want out of it. But as they operate more competitively than cooperatively, and outcomes are not very good. Another serious problem for public-private partnerships is that governments often deal with issues that have life and death consequences. And when something bad happens, the example up here is the space program from the United States. Again, just a quick sidelight. One of the great achievements of American government was a statement that John Kennedy made when he was president, a very audacious goal that he set in 1961, saying, this was at the time, again, maybe you guys have read about it in history books, I lived it, but the Soviet Union and the United States were locked in a global competition. And one morning, the people in the United States awoke to Sputniks circling the world. The Soviet Union beat the United States into space. And that wasn't just a competition, that was a world security issue as well. And President Kennedy at the time felt a need to one-up the other side. So he, in his State of the Nation address, said, "We will put a man on the moon within a decade." And everybody thought he was absolutely out of his mind. The truth of the matter is the United States succeeded in doing that in less than a decade. But the way they did it, NASA is the space agency of the United States. It was started then. There was no such agencies. They had virtually no staff. NASA and the US space program was built by partnering with the private sector, with a number of private sector firms, as it continues to this day, which is great until somebody dies. Like the Columbia shuttle, which blew up on entry, and all the astronauts were killed. Now the problem becomes, who's to blame? Because everybody wants to blame somebody. And in this particular case, you have three major parties: Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and NASA. And that accountability issue in the public sector, because of the issues of such high public concern, becomes much more challenging. The reality is, of course, they're all responsible and accountable, but it becomes a difficult political issue. You can read through this at your own time. My point is, and you'll see from the slides, Hungary, Poland, Singapore, you can switch. Colombia, a state, we were at a talk yesterday where Colombia came up as, at ISU, we were talking about comparables for Georgia and places to look. Singapore was one. I had prepared this a long time ago. But Singapore is a great place to look, it seems to me, for Georgia, is looking for models to succeed. Colombia is another one. Colombia is a country that's faced many, many troubles over the last years. It's had a civil war ongoing for more than 50 years. Yet they have very effectively used public-private partnerships in very important areas like water, like sewer, where they've been able to both not only provide higher quality services and more coverage, but actually provide better service, affordable service to the poor. One of the fears that people have about public-private partnerships is that the poor gets excluded out of this. Not necessarily. Designed properly, these kinds of partnerships can actually serve the poor better than government can. Again, done properly. And one of the really dramatic, if you just go back one, the Transmilenio. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Bogota, Colombia, but if you want to see traffic, it's some of the worst traffic in the world, because there was no subway system. And the bus system was pretty much a bunch of 175 different private vendors. Ultimately, they decided subways were unaffordable, so they built these dedicated express bus lines across the city. Government provided the funding, private sector did the construction and the operation. It has dramatically changed life in Colombia. Not only has the traffic it hasn't gone away, but the traffic is navigable. People can get to work at a much lower price, much more efficiently, and they connected in by strategic planning, all the private bus lines. So poor people get to work much more cheaply, much more fast. More and more the middle class people are using the express buses as well. So a huge success in a country that has a lot of challenges, public-private partnership. Brazil, another country that has used public-private partnerships very effectively. I think what's interesting a little bit about the Brazil model, and might be useful for you to look at as well, is their most successful public-private partnerships have been done at the state level, not at the national level. The national government has had more problems doing it because of legal problems, the magnitude, some fears about corruption and politicization. The states and some of the cities have been much more effective in privatizing and partnering. Okay, I think we could skip this one, and let's go to New York City. There's a picture here, and I'd like to start off just to give a balanced picture of a partnership in New York City that failed. In the background, that's City Hall. That's where the mayor sits in New York City. And those workers are moving a vending machine for a soft drink called Snapple, which is a fruit-flavored kind of soda that in the late 80s and early 90s was very popular. It was one of the hottest drinks in New York. And Mike Bloomberg was elected mayor of New York, a businessman. You probably heard the name Bloomberg, Bloomberg News, Bloomberg in the financial area. I don't think this has ever been the case in the history of New York City, and no city I know of in the United States. Mike Bloomberg is not only the mayor, he's also the richest person in New York City. His personal wealth is $22 billion. He ran for mayor 3 times. His first time, he spent $60 million of his own money to run for mayor, which dwarfed all the other candidates combined. The second time he ran, he spent $80 million. The last time he ran, and it was more trouble, the third time, he spent $100 million of his own money to run for mayor. In fact, there's talk that he may run as a third-party candidate for president, and his expectation, if he did, is he'd spend $300 to $400 million out of his own money to run for president. Very successful businessman, a man who has a lot of money. So in his first term, he was elected mayor with a philosophy that business would be more engaged and use more effectively public-private partnerships. And very soon after he was elected, the president of Snapple came to visit the mayor. And he said, "Mr. Mayor, I have a great idea for you. I would like Snapple to be the official drink of New York City." And the mayor kind of looked at him with a smile and said, "Oh, that's nice." And he said, "Mr. Mayor, I realize that you just wouldn't designate us because we're such a great drink. So here's my proposition. I want to pay you $250 million, $10 million a year for 10 years, $25 million a year for 10 years, to be the official drink of New York City." And the mayor said, "You're kidding, right?" He said, "No, that's the deal." He said, "No, come on, you're kidding. $25 million a year, and all I have to do is let you call yourselves the official drink of New York City? That's it?" "Well, no, not exactly. Mostly it's that. Just one other thing. If we're the official drink of New York City, then everybody who works for New York City should drink Snapple. So, what we would like to do at our expense is we want to remove all the vending machines from all the buildings, New York City buildings." Now, New York City has 400,000 employees, millions of teachers, students, everybody else passing through. We want to take out every other Coke, Pepsi, everything else, and put in Snapple machines. And if you let us do that, we got a deal. The mayor said, "Great, let's do it." So they signed the agreement, webpage, Snapple's official drink. This is them actually moving out the Coke machines and moving in the Snapple machines. So they projected that they would make enough money from the Snapple business with the city to cover the $25 million. And then the rest would just be advertising. They'd have this huge impact. So they saw it as a no risk for them. Didn't work out. If you know New York City, great. Inside City Hall, all there were Snapple machines. But if you walk right to that edge of that picture, which is about 25 steps, there are about 20 vending carts selling Coke, Pepsi, orange juice, water, and everything else you can imagine. And that square around, there are restaurants, bodegas, everything else. So if you didn't want a Snapple, you just walked out the door and bought something else. So in fact, they were only generating, by the 4th year, $6 million from all their city business. So at the end of year 4, they came back in to meet with the mayor. And they said, well, Mr. Mayor, this hasn't worked out really well, so we'd sort of like not to do this anymore. And the mayor said, you gotta be kidding. Deal's a deal. This is the private sector, guys. You signed the contract, too bad. I want my $25 million. You know, and they said, oh, come on, you know, and started to cry and, you know, say they were gonna go bankrupt and they were gonna move out of New York. Anyway, finally the mayor said, okay, you can pay me $15 million for the last 6 years. They said, no, we can't pay $15 million. They finally agreed on 12. So they finished the $12 million, and that was the end of the deal. What's the point? The point is that even somebody as smart as Mike Bloomberg can make a mistake. And I think from the public side, you need to think very carefully about what the job of a public official is and what's a priority. Providing vending machines and official drinks is really on the fringe of what public officials should be worried about. To his credit, that was the last mistake like that Mike Bloomberg made, and he made very few mistakes after that. So partnerships don't always work out, sometimes because they're around the wrong subject. But in the remaining time I have, let me talk about one partnership that's been extraordinarily successful, a second that's been very good, and a third that's okay. So again, just like private firms, there are lots of different reasons why New York City gets into partnerships to leverage money. Something that can also be useful is political support. By engaging private vendors, it's good for the city, it's good for business, and it's good for the public officials. It can help us provide better customer service, get new ideas, share responsibility for success and for failures, and ultimately also save money. The greatest success of a public-private partnership in New York City has been the New York City park system. Again, if you think back to the 70s and 80s, one of the most popular and famous movies